the entire Dune book series is such a weird and odd book series to talk about, mainly because every single book in the 6-book series of Dune is completely relegated to its own separate story. Hell, some of the book stories are actually interspersed from thousands to 10,000 years later. It's such a bizarre book series. But honestly, the Dune book series is one of my all-time favorite book series because you literally have to be in tune and focus on what you're reading. And that's a big struggle with me as an avid book reader. I tend to read, and as I start to read, I just kind of drift away in thought. Thankfully, I actually read extremely complex, mature books where if I do that even 1 second, I have no fucking idea where I am anymore, and I have to redo everything I just completely mesmerized out of. Now, with that being said, the first Dune book, which nowadays has like 3 Dune movies and 1 whole ass TV series based around it, and I've only ever watched the first Dune film by Denis Villeneuve, which is basically a prologue of the Dune book story. It's the first half of the Dune book, but essentially movie-wise it's basically a prologue to everything to come. Now the Dune book story, the first Dune book at least, is mainly revolved around a planetary war about spice and who can harvest the most. That's the simplest, simpleton's way of explaining it. Think of Game of Thrones with spice, and that's basically what Dune is as a whole for the first book. I love it. Don't get me wrong. I love the characters in it. I love the villains in it that are very fleshed out. They're evil as evil can be. I love Paul Atreides' character. He's not just some whiny little white kid that is just there because of family lineage. No, he actually accepts the responsibility that he needs to help. And everything that his father does, the Duke Leto Atreides, Paul doesn't look at it as, I'm just a whiny little kid, I don't want to do any of this. He actually understands everything that his father gets put through, and his mother, who is also there to try and train him somewhat as within the Bene Gesserit ways, which is kind of a no-no in the Dune lore, where Bene Gesserit is more so just always women, but Paul Atreides possesses certain powers of the Bene Gesserit that the ladies aren't really too avid to the idea of a man being in it, but they're also just kind of like meh, because he possesses the certain prowess to be able to be of the Bene Gesserit. And that's where this story goes into play, where the Dune story revolves around Paul Atreides and his friend group's way of trying to just preserve all the spice possible in a humanly way, as well as the main villain, Harkonnen, and all of them. They're kind of just in it to conquer all, and that's such a simplistic way to put it, but I have to say that because as evil can be, that's essentially what evil's plots tend to be. I don't really want to spoil much else with the Dune book. I will just say it's a great read, but every age can read this book. Every age honestly can read all of these books, although the last half of this book series does kind of get a bit more mature than parents might want their kids to be reading, mainly because, spoiler, a lot of the last half of this book series revolves around kidnapping men and raping them so that their bloodline stays whole and they can keep making, I guess, clones of them. But essentially, all 6 of these books are great reads. Now, Dune Messiah picks up after the Dune events at the end, and it's basically just a continuation with essentially the same kind of vibes and everything. It's kind of like an epilogue of the story of Dune. Then there's Children of Dune, which leaps time where it's focused on Paul Atreides and his kids and the characters around them. And I don't want to spoil too much, but Children of Dune, as the title suggests, is about his kids and everything revolving around their story and their storyline. And then we go from that to God Emperor of Dune, which is my personal favorite because it's set, I think, like 5,000 or 10,000 years later, where one of the main characters from previous Dune books did some shit and turned himself into one of the giant worms, and he ends up being, as you can predict, the God Emperor of Dune. And the reason I love this book, God Emperor of Dune, the most out of all of them is because of how super focused and well-paced the storyline is. This is revolving around 4 or 5 different main characters, and this is very much so like how Game of Thrones is plotted, where you have the God Emperor's point of view, and then you have characters around him, their point of views, and then you have all around the world other characters' point of views, and it all ends up meshing into one giant happenstance event that happens around the end of the book. And it's just, it's an amazing book to read. Honestly, God Emperor of Dune for me is a 10 out of 10. Then, if I remember correctly, the next one is Heretics of Dune, which I kind of want to explain Heretics of Dune and Chapter House Dune as a whole thing, mainly because, I don't know, to me, they continue the storylines within each book, but at the same time, there's a whole another thousands of years in between these two books, but they still cover essentially the same kind of storylines, as well as the same kind of characters. Overall, for me, the Dune book series as a whole is a great, unique read. I really don't have too much bad to say about these books. Really, the only thing negative I can say about the Dune book series is not even are they so mature, but Frank Herbert wrote these books in such a methodically complex way where even the most mature book reader will have a hell of a time reading these books. Now, I can honestly say these books do tend to get a little bit easier of reads as you go through the book series, and that's not a knock on them whatsoever. I love all of these books. They're all entertaining to a fault. But I will have to say the peak of Dune's book series, hands down, is God Emperor of Dune. It's not that I'm knocking on any of the other books or the stories. It's just God Emperor of Dune is so well paced and so well focused on its main storyline. Whereas, say for example, the first Dune, great read, but Frank Herbert knew he was going to make a 6-book series out of this whole entire franchise. And the first Dune book has its own plot, has its own story, but it also feels kind of just like an introduction into the Dune universe. And that's also kind of where Denis Villeneuve stumbles in the 2-part movie series, in that what he adapted is really just an introductory form of the Dune story. And that's fine. I love the Dune movies, much like I love the Dune books. But as I said earlier, my all-time favorite Dune book is God Emperor of Dune. I never read any of Frank Herbert's son's origin, prequel books, spin-off books. I've never read any of those, mainly because I'm the type of book reader, I prefer the main bulk story. That's why for George Martin's Game of Thrones books, I'm able to easily read from Fire and Blood all the way to the Dance of Dragons, because GRRM wrote all of those in their entirety. So overall for me, Dune is an excellent, unique, extremely off-paced, and just extremely weird adventure I'll gladly recommend to read through. It's a very, very solid and strong 9 out of 10 Dune book series. Thank you.